Please welcome to the stage, James Goebel.
Hi. Slides? Excellent. I'm here to talk about joy. You might be surprised to find out that there's a fictional character that reminds my friends of me. Anybody care to guess who that is? Eeyore. Together? Eeyore. He gets a little car sick when we walk around a lot, so we're going to put him down. Notice he has a TEDx t-shirt, so he came prepared. There's an interesting challenge when you talk about joy. I believe it's because people have preconceived notions about what joy is. And I want to draw a clear, distinct difference between happiness and joy, because I think the dictionary is wrong. Happiness, most people associate with pleasant feelings. So that's the word I want in your head, pleasant. Joy is about meaningfulness. When something's meaningful, the joy that is created is far different than the happiness that people feel. Let's explore some options. Does anybody here run 5Ks, 10Ks, marathons? Do you know somebody who does? My daughter doesn't quite look this way, but she's about to run her second 5K. And if you stand at the finish line, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that most people who run find this pleasant. I don't see why this is a happy thing. They're in pain. But there's something very odd about this. It's joyful. This is very fulfilling for most people who do it. Otherwise, I have no idea why they would choose to. But they've overcome something big, something challenging. They've applied courage in a way that's meaningful in their lives and overcome something. And usually, oddly enough, they all run together on the same day. Right? There's a camaraderie in this. This phenomenon happens in lots of different places in our lives, where pleasant and joy or meaning are distinct. 3 times in my life, I was blessed to be there when my wife gave birth. This is not a pleasant experience, near as I could tell. I think there are endorphins involved that help make it go away afterwards. I didn't experience any of those. But this is probably 3 of the most joyful days in our lives that we will remember forever. Women trade stories about this kind of thing. And they're not talking about the pleasant part. Why? Why do they share these stories? They're re-examining the joy in their lives through a really interesting moment that led to meaning in their lives. We see the same thing at work or at school. When we take on a project that's bigger, more difficult than we thought we would. When we are forced sometimes to work with somebody unpleasant, like me. Sitting side by side, locked in a room, working really hard, it's not always pleasant. But when you achieve something bigger than yourself, and you can look back on it, it's amazing how people tell these stories about how they enjoyed working with these people they don't like. Why? It's the joy of the accomplishment, of achieving something bigger than themselves. That's not pleasant, except in retrospect. So, let's apply this in our community. How many times do we make a choice to put our own personal satisfaction aside our immediate happiness, our pleasant feelings, in order to serve others. Why do we do that? In most cases, I would argue it's because of the lasting joy, the bigger picture, the meaning that it gives, right? It can be incredibly fulfilling. It's just not always fun when you're doing this with your relatives, right? Or others that you know, because not everybody's going to be super excited to see you. They're not like that orange guy with the tail that bounces across the stage, friend of my friend, right? But when we look back at where we spent meaningful time with somebody else, it doesn't always have to come wrapped in a box with a bow and pretty unicorns in the background and rainbows, right? Sometimes it's the quiet times. So when we look at this, I really want to contrast pleasant with meaning. I talk about joy. This is a little weird for somebody whose nickname is Eeyore. And I talk about it in the context of work. In our world, we believe joy powers teams of people to work together to achieve extraordinary outcomes, even when the work is not pleasant. We've built an office with no offices and no walls. Why? To build community, to build connection between the human beings, to make them behave differently. And the problem is it's not always convenient. One of the weird things we do is imagine you're in the third grade. It's been a long semester. Some interesting dynamics have filled the room. Teacher decides, I want to change the energy. So they decide to move everybody around. Many of you have been seated in the same seat all day long. I want you to look to your left or your right, find a partner, find your bag of stuff, because that's going with you. And you're going to stand up and swap positions if that's possible. If it's inconvenient, that's okay. But no, everybody stand up. Yes, he is that crazy. Swap positions with somebody and sit down in a new chair. Can you feel the energy in the room change? Now, the curmudgeons like me are going to go, well, that's pointless. But there's a couple of people who are saying, this feels really kind of weird. All I did is move over like 2 seats and I feel different. The experience different. I changed something. In our environment, everybody, on average, changes their seat in the office once a week to sit by somebody different. It's inconvenient. Joy is not always convenient. In order to encourage people to work together, 2 people work on the same task at the same time on the same computer. We build social connections. This is also one of the advantages of trading partners once a week, because everybody eventually partners with everyone. We have a stand-up meeting. Everybody stands. You know what happens if you have a meeting without chairs? It goes much faster. And yes, there are dogs in the office and babies. But everybody announces to everybody else, 100 people in the room will take us 13 minutes. What are you going to get done today? We plan things with paper, folded index cards, multi-million-dollar projects. Some of these are medical devices. What's interesting is when you plan with paper, people stand up and move things around. They collaborate because community is what gets things done. And unfortunately, it's not always pleasant. There are difficult decisions to be made. There will be people who are unhappy. But joy comes out of producing something that's meaningful. Turns out there's another context to which this applies, and that's education. One of my favorite educators told me once, it doesn't matter what happens at school, you are still the primary educator of your children. So my wife and I have 3 pupils that we teach. These are my children, along with my wife. And I have found all the things that I teach about work environments apply at home. I'm just thick-headed, it takes me a while. So I want to tell you 2 stories. This is our eldest child. At one point, she struggled with math, many years ago. In my mind, the problem, we talked about it, we encouraged homework, we did this, we did that, it all failed. And we hit upon a really interesting idea. What if we made math interesting to her? And the problem is, interesting to her does not match the story problems that comes in the books. We had to come up with a project that was actually interesting to her, that involved math. And so we thought about it, we struggled, we tried a couple of attempts, we failed. Eventually, we hit upon it. Let's build a dollhouse. I pulled this photo out. My daughter was like, "That's so awesome, that's that dollhouse we built." No, it's not, it's that math project we did. We did angles, we did dimensions, we did cost analysis. She sanded this thing. She doesn't like to do this kind of work. Why did this matter? Because it had a greater purpose for her. It had meaning. And because we were working on something that had meaning to her, doing the math was just something you did, something you engaged in because it had a purpose. And it was incredible. It was wonderful. There's a problem, though. If every time my children got bored with school, we came up with a big project, I now have a new full-time job, which would be really cool, but we have to eat. And so the question becomes, how in the world can we get this to happen all the time? Because it's often inconvenient to find that joy, that meaning. Several years later, I had an incredibly interesting insight. Each of my children along the way, reading is very important in our family, and we worked with each one, and they all had different levels and speeds at which they uptake it. But then the magic would happen. You would find one of them late at night reading a book. Boy, Harry Potter came along at the perfect time. Right? This child you're working with to read, they're under the covers with a flashlight reading this ginormous novel. And here's the problem. I need them to go to sleep. It's really inconvenient. But the joy's happening right now. They're powering their own learning with utter passion and interest. And what are they doing? They're practicing reading instinctively. They're enjoying what they're doing. They're achieving. And so I kind of struggled, right? As I tell them, put the book away and go skipping down the hallway going, "Thank God, it's wonderful." But how often does this happen? Imagine a school system where a class is 55 minutes long, and you finally engage a student, and you get them excited, and the bell rings, and their excitement has to end because they have to go do something different. How often do we structure our world for the convenience of the work we're doing, the convenience of other factors, and we accidentally squash the joy that powers extraordinary performance? It almost happens by itself, and we go around unintentionally squashing it because we don't recognize it for what it is, right? There weren't banners, there weren't streamers, there wasn't background music. There was utter joy in some quiet activity. So the challenge I want to offer you is learn to recognize joy when it's happening. I want you to be mindful. Now, the beautiful part of this statement is it's so easy to say. It's not so easy to do. I struggle with it. Here's an example of mindfulness. These are my 2 physicists. Imagine my 2 physicists decide that they're going to go off and do a project while I'm busy doing the taxes. So I look out the back window, and these 2 strapping, strong children decide they're going to carry an 18-foot extension ladder across the backyard. Now, if I asked them to do this, they could explain to me why it's impossible. They're making a beeline across the property line. My first instinct is no, because the only thing I see in my head is not joy, not mindfulness. I see a future trip to the ER. It wasn't this one. There are others. And I caught myself on the way out the door to stop this. Something wonderful happened where I realized there's something joyful going on. Why? Because there's no other reason that would power them to go pick up this ladder and haul it all the way across the yard. They're trying to do something. What if I help? And just happen to be there in case something bad happens, like, gravity. They built a swing out of a skateboard. Now, we get to talk about the load limits of the rope. We get to talk about forces, distance, height, stuff they're not interested in, except they're going to get on this thing, right? And now all of a sudden, it's got meaning. And now we can talk about all the things they don't want to talk about in math. And they did it all by themselves. I didn't have to make the project up. I think I ultimately had to carry the ladder back, because there wasn't really a whole lot of meaning in carrying it back to the barn. But how can you recognize joy and be mindful? And that be mindful is really hard. I heard this first from a gentleman named Paul Saginaw, who may have borrowed it from somewhere else. This is not useful. It's clever, but it's not useful. He's got a much more beautiful way to say it. When furious, get curious. Because if you're upset, boy, there's something fueling that, and that means somebody else did something, and there's something fueling that, and hey, maybe there's something really cool going on, and you're stuck in a mode where you can't see it. Because I was worried about my children's safety. Remember that birth thing? Right? Got to keep them safe. So here's my challenge to you. My friends often recognize that, they say good morning, I say, you have proof? Right? Joy comes in different packages. It's not, like the dictionary says, it's just lots of happiness. No, it comes in passion. It comes in meaning. It comes in people truly connecting with something they're doing. It's powerful at work. It's powerful at school. It's powerful at home and in your community. Learn to recognize it. Learn to look for it. Learn to help it, because your actions that you take every day either encourage it or accidentally squash it. And you have to be very careful of that, because I know I squash it all the time with my children, and I've learned that what I really need to do is recognize when it's happening and foster it. I don't have to make up the projects. Guess what? They do it themselves. They already know what they're interested in. The people in your community, they know what they're passionate about. Help them. Joy matters. Thank you.